to have this woman here tonight. I mean, it's actually, you know, it's kind of ridiculous that you guys have managed to score this lady. I'm introducing a woman tonight who is solely responsible for creating New York Fashion Week. She's an innovator. She's somebody who has transformed the fashion industry. She is a wealth of knowledge and talent and insight. She was the longtime director of the CFDA, which basically runs the entire fashion industry. If you don't know, you need to know, you need to be friends with them. And her list of accolades are just, you know, as tall as I am. So please let me welcome the lovely, talented, brilliant Fern Mallis.
I'm not Dean Martin, I'm just bringing my water up. Well, thank you. So this is Oz. I was always wondering where the wizard wound up. Nashville. The wizard is in Nashville, go figure. And it's delightful. I'm delighted to be here tonight also on your first gala evening, the first evening for this extraordinary fund. And I'm also thrilled to be in Nashville and here for Nashville Fashion Week, and even more so as it's my very first trip to Nashville. And just as everybody told me, you're gonna love it, I'm loving it, I'm having a great time. I even had chicken today at Hattie B's. The mild one, though. So I'm delighted and honored to talk to you all tonight about Fashion Week and why it matters, or does it matter? After creating Fashion Week in New York just over 20 years ago, can't even believe it's 20 years, I'm now enjoying all of the babies, siblings, and relatives that have been born since then, all over this country and all over the world. I kind of feel like I was fashion's Johnny Appleseed, dropping pins and fabric with lots of love and passion, watering designers, models, hairstylists, makeup artists, event producers, lighting designers, DJs, PR and marketing people, dedicated volunteers, and many generous sponsors. And voila, Fashion Weeks started to sprout. But I guess with a name like Fern, I have a green thumb. And by the way, green is very much the color for next fall. And let's also hope that that green means dollars as well. Can anyone guess how many Fashion Weeks there are? 35, okay. Mickey Boardman, do you know Mickey Boardman from Paper Magazine? He was quoted in an article saying, I really want to do a book called It's Always Fashion Week Somewhere in the World. And Mickey gets invited to many of them. Well, the last time I think someone actually did a count was in a New York Times article back in 2008. And at that article said there were 152. So I'm making an educated guess that by now it could be up to 200 worldwide. That would mean there really could be a Fashion Week every other week of the year. So besides the obvious ones in New York, Paris, Milan, and London, there are Fashion Weeks, and just to mention a few, because again, almost 200. Rio, Sao Paulo, Hong Kong, Beijing, Shanghai, Chengdu, Tokyo, Seoul, Sri Lanka, Antwerp, Copenhagen, Oslo, Stockholm, Berlin, Amsterdam, Rome, Fiji, Colombia, Mexico City, Buenos Aires, Liberia, New Zealand, Madrid, Barcelona, Lisbon, Nassau, Aruba, Mumbai, Delhi, Goa, Dubai, Sydney, Melbourne, Moscow, Zurich, Toronto, Montreal, Istanbul, Lahore, and Beirut in Pakistan, Lebanon, Jakarta, Kuala Lumpur, Karachi, Tbilisi, Tel Aviv, Cape Town, Johannesburg, Durban, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Zimbabwe. The list gives credence to something that Simon Goonan, the creative ambassador of Barney's, once said: "I want to be the fashion editor of National Geographic." And here in the USA, besides New York, there's Brooklyn, New Jersey Fashion Week and Atlantic City, Boston, Baltimore, and Maryland Fashion Week, St. Louis, Portland, Washington, Tampa Bay, Miami, Savannah, Charleston, where I just came back from, Los Angeles, Orange County, Chicago, Cleveland, and here in lovely Nashville, and many more cities I'm sure I'm missing. Is there that much talent in the world to support these events? Maybe, but I doubt it. But you never know where the next fashion star will come from. I've always said that the best fashion editors and retailers are like pigs sniffing for truffles. Somehow, if the talent exists, they will find it. It will surface, and it could be right here in Nashville. And that is one of the best reasons why fashion weeks matter. It's important, however, for each of these fashion weeks to ask the critical questions. Who is this week for? What do we want to accomplish? And how do we define its success? If you can answer all of those questions satisfactorily to your participants, your partners, your team, and your audience, you win. And mind you, the answers aren't necessarily the same in every city. Fashion weeks, as you've heard others say tonight, create opportunity. They create jobs. For a huge amount of people. They create buzz. They generate revenue in stores, in ads, in bars, in hotels, restaurants, and at Starbucks. I have one important question for you all. Who here has bought something new to wear this week? There you go, mission accomplished already. Most people think bringing the Olympics to their city is the best way to generate revenue and make a difference and make an impact. I really have to differ. It takes years to create an Olympic bid and millions of dollars just to be in the competing process. If you're lucky enough to win, that's when the real work begins. And the billions of dollars budgeted to kick in to create infrastructure, venues, transportation, new airports and roads, hotels and so forth, all for 2 weeks. And then good luck booking all the venues and keeping up that momentum. Fashion Week is much easier and comes every year, and in some cities twice a year. And the people are much prettier and dress a whole lot better. Clearly, I'm a big fan of Fashion Weeks. I organized, as you heard, and created New York's Fashion Week in Bryant Park back in 1993, when many of you here were probably still in diapers. And I ran it until the tents moved out of Bryant Park to Lincoln Center in 2010. Is there anyone here who hasn't heard the story of how, or should I say why, Fashion Week came to be in New York? Okay, I'll tell you the story. It's good fashion history. Back in 1991, I'd left a big job back in 1990. I had a long career before the fashion career, working in the interior design and furnishings industry, doing marketing and public relations. I started my career way back when I won a contest at Mademoiselle magazine and was a guest editor, and then went on to do things in fashion and in retail. I was the fashion director of a department store in New York. I did lots of different things, and then shifted gears to the interiors and architecture world. And then the real estate boom crashed in New York in the late 80s. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do now? You know, I was running a big design center in New York, the International Design Center in New York. And so I took a temporary job doing some public relations for friends in New York. And I was reading Women's Wear Daily, which I grew up reading because my dad was in the industry. He was a scarf salesman, and all my uncles were in the industry. And so I read it every day. He brought it home from school all the time. And I read about, so I was aware of everything going on all the time in the fashion industry. And during this time at this temporary PR firm that I was working at, an event in New York happened called 7th on Sale. Any of you heard of that event? It was back in 1990. It was one of the most extraordinary events that the CFDA actually organized to raise money for AIDS. And that was at a time when the AIDS epidemic was unbelievable. It just affected everybody in our creative industries, all the designers and creative people. And everybody was stepping up to the plate to do everything they could to raise money. I was on the founding board member of DIFA, the Design Industries Foundation Fighting AIDS, doing lots of events. And we pushed, actually, the CFDA to do something big in fashion. They took their time till they got around to doing it, but as is their wont to do, they did it brilliantly when they were ready to do it. And 7th on Sale was a pivotal event in the industry. And for many people, it was the first time people knew what the CFDA was. It was a small, much more insular trade association of designers. Carolyn Rome was the president at the time. And after that event happened and raised $5 million in one weekend, creating the most extraordinary shopping over 4 days in New York's Armory, with little booths designed by Robert Isabel, who was the great party planner and designer. People bought tickets for $20 and went in and shopped for 2 hours. And every designer was in their booth selling all their clothing at wholesale and below. It was a magical night, and they raised a ton of money, but it depleted the CFDA after that. So the CFDA office was, at that time, I think about the size of the platform I'm standing on. And Carolyn resigned, the executive director at the time resigned, or actually his contract wasn't renewed. And so there I was reading Women's Wear and being affiliated with the industry, reading how they were looking for a new executive director. And they had interviewed hundreds of people. It was a small search committee. And I mentioned to my friends, maybe I should throw my hat in the ring for the CFDA job. And light bulbs went off everywhere. And it was like, oh my God, you're perfect for that. You're perfect for that. So I said, well, who do I talk to? How do I get my foot in the door? And I was told, call Donna Karen. I said, call Donna Karen. Like, Donna's going to take my call. So then they said, you know what? We'll find out who the search committee is. And it was a designer named Stan Herman and a designer named Monica Tilley. And so I sent them a resume on probably Friday afternoon. And Monday morning, call was the first call of the day. How soon can you get in here? And I went to meet them, I think, the next day. And they, and I said to Stan Herman, he was like, oh, of course I remember you. And I said, no, you don't, but that's okay. But it's one of my good career tips. Everything comes full circle in your life. So, you don't burn bridges. People come back all the time. So in any case, I talked to them about what I was doing and why I thought I'd be great for that job. They said, can you come back in 2 more days, which was in fact when they had the finalists that they had already chosen. 5 finalists. I literally got in right under the door, right on time. And I came back, and the next meeting was a meeting with Calvin Klein, Bill Blass, Carolyn Rome, and Stan and Monica. And they said, and I knew Calvin Klein from my days in New York, party days and beach parties and things, and hello, and everybody. And they all said to me, well, why should we hire you? You haven't been in fashion in 10 years. And I said, I never stopped wearing clothes. And I said, and I never stopped shopping. And I never stopped reading magazines. And so, we talked about all sorts of things, everything I was doing. And they then, interviewed the other candidates. And clearly they made it clear that they wanted me for this position. And I had to come back again. Now, this was like the 3rd meeting where you're totally anxious about what you're wearing every time you have to go to one of these meetings. And the next one was a big board meeting in one of the designer showrooms. And every designer whose name you ever heard of was at that meeting. He was on the board of the CFDA. It was the people I just mentioned. It was Ralph Lauren. It was Oscar de la Renta. It was Donna Karen. It was Miss Bill Blass. It was Mary McFadden. Even Eleanor Lampert, who was an honorary member who had helped create the CFDA a long time ago. And they drilled me with lots of questions about everything I could do and would do, and would I spend all my time raising money for them and doing the things they did, because I'm on DIFA's board and I have to stop doing that. And I said, don't ask me to stop ever raising money for my friends who are dying. I will raise money you need, and I'll do what I need to do. And we just talked and talked about a lot of great things. It was a challenging meeting. I was then sent off while they deliberated. And I came back into the room about 10 minutes later, and the entire CFDA board sang happy birthday to me. It was my birthday that day. It was a very memorable moment. And I then went to this office that was this big and proceeded to change it and turn it around and said, you know, we've got to fix this. This is not the headquarters for the American fashion industry. Changed the logo to the famous logo with the red F, and, you know, started to build a team in an office. And the first agenda that I had before I actually started in the job but was hired, because I was hired at the end of March, I was starting later in April, was Market Week in New York, what it was called. It was called Market Week, Fashion Week. There were 50 fashion shows. They were in 50 different locations. Nobody talked to each other. Things were uptown, downtown, all over town, kind of the way it is now again. And there was a show that Michael Kors was having in an empty loft space in the 20s in New York. And designers love raw concrete spaces. And it was very tight and very crowded. And you know the music is really loud at a fashion show. And if something's not nailed down, it shakes and moves. Well, the music went on. And the models coming down the runway were Cindy, Linda, Naomi, Claudia, all the one-name supermodels of the day. And the ceiling came down. Literally, the plaster started falling in chunks down the runway. And the one-name supermodels, they deserve what they get paid. They just brushed it off their shoulders and kept walking. There's not an editor or a person in the room who remembered the clothing in that show, because they all were looking where the emergency exits were. And the plaster landed in the laps of Susie Menkes from the International Herald Tribune, and in the lap of Carrie Donovan, who was the fashion editor of the New York Times. And the next day's headlines said, "We live for fashion, we don't want to die for it." And I said, I think my job description just changed. And it did. And it became our mission and my mission in a very small office to organize, centralize, and modernize the American runway shows. I mean, New York is the headquarters for the fashion industry. And so the industry is there. We needed to get everybody together in a room, like you said, get everybody in the same place. And it was not the easiest sell in the world. It was 2 years of trying to sell this concept. But while the concept was fresh in everybody's mind, in the summer of 1992 in New York, is when the Democratic Convention was in town. And that was the convention that nominated Bill Clinton as the president, to run for president. And every industry in New York had somebody there for a year working on things to do for the delegates and the press that were coming to New York. The theaters did a whole theater night, the museums did a whole museum night, everybody did something. And we as the fashion industry said, we'll put on a fashion show. And so we got sponsors, and we had a tent put up in Central Park. And it was accommodated about 1,200 people, beautiful big white tent. Every single designer from the CFDA at that time just about participated. And it was the names I mentioned, plus DVF and Isaac Mizrahi and Todd Oldham and Anna Swee and Betsy Johnson and you name it. And they all had models and they all had clothing there. And at the end of the runway, they all came down one at a time with their models for the finale. And we were all standing on the lawn in Central Park, and they all looked at me and said, "Is this what you're talking about? A tent like this?" And I said, "Exactly, just like this." And so I then was given the blessing by the CFDA's board to go to Paris and Milan that fall to see what they were doing there and come back with all the R&D and all the pictures. And it was clear that the time had come for American designers to really strut their stuff and compete equally in the same kind of scenario that was happening in Milan and in Paris. And that was not happening. At that point, if you were going to a Calvin Klein show, they would clear out the showroom and cram in so many people in there that it was the biggest fire trap in the world. If the fire department knew, they would have shut down every one of those shows in New York at the time. They were disasters. Editors were caught in freight elevators stuck between floors because they were crowding too many people in them. That same season, Isaac Mizrahi had a show in a loft in Lower Broadway at like 8 o'clock at night. And you know, if you had a ticket and got a seat at an Isaac show, you didn't move You got in there, you sat there, and all the power blew. And it was pitch black, and people were smoking in those days, and cigarettes and lighters, and the photographers had some extra flashes that went off, and everybody sat there till new generators came because the lighting designer had gone on to another show. But those were the kind of conditions, and we said that's deplorable, that can't happen in New York and in America. And the designers were so talented, they needed to shine and have the world come see their collections, which were not able to happen before that. So that was, that was back in 1993. We created the very first 7th on 6th, we called it, which was named after 7th on Sale, and 6th Avenue being where Bryant Park was, so we moved 7th Avenue to 6th Avenue. And in order to do it, I had to raise a lot of money. We had a small team, and it was the very first fashion week, I think, in the world that was sponsored and had sponsors involved in it. Nobody had ever done that with a fashion show before. And the first calls I made in planning this when we decided to do it was called, actually, publisher friends in the industry had all the best relationships. And somebody set me up with the CEO of Evian, who at that time, there weren't 15 bottled waters on the shelves, and they were looking for a new way to brand Evian in America. And they signed up in a minute to do this. They saw the potential with the fashion industry. And then I called Anna Wintour and told her what we needed to do. And she said, how much money do you need? And I said, I don't know, maybe $500,000. And she said, all right, let me get back to you, and I'll call Cy Newhouse. And Anna's quick, if nothing else, and called back maybe the end of the day, if not the next day, and said, we'll give you $100,000. I said, thank you, great, we'll take it. And I then called the president of Hearst, and I said, Anna's giving us $100,000. And he said, well, okay, Bazaar will give you $100,000. And then I called the president of Hachette Philippaki and told him, Bazaar and Vogue are giving us $100,000. And he said, well, okay, Elle will give you $100,000. And then the publisher, then Hearst called back and said, Town and Country wants in. And I said, I'll take another 100. And then I called a friend who was at Clairol, and I said, we need a beauty sponsor. I was looking for people who could support what we were doing and had a vested interest in it. And so Clairol came on board. I called a gal who was originally my first assistant when I started a public relations business, and she worked off my typewriter return. And she was now the managing director of prescriptives at Estee Lauder, and that was a hot young brand at the time. I said, Janie, we need to do this. She gave me $100,000 and got them committed. She's now the global president of Estee Lauder. And many of my assistants have gone on to amazing jobs like that through the years. And then, if you're stupid enough, I felt like Roger Moore, I called the president of General Motors. You just get on the phone and you ask to speak to them, and they go, okay. And so I spoke to his secretary and explained what we were doing, and she said, this is interesting, I'll have him get back to you. And somebody did call back, and I kept such bad notes that I don't even remember his name. But, he said, this is great for the American fashion industry, and I said, you're America's leading motor, car industry, and you should do this, and car manufacturing. And so he said they'd think about it, and actually David Pecker, who was at Hachette Philippaki, published all the car and driver magazines at the time, and he said, I'll close that deal for you, and he did. And that's how Fashion Week started. And then we got all the designers on board, and that wasn't even so easy as much as you would think so. We had meetings with all the designers and all the young ones, what I guess we now call emerging designers, was sitting in the room and said, why should we do this? Is this going to be good for us? Is Calvin Klein going to show there? And I looked out at the audience and I said, Calvin, who was in the front row, I said, do you want to answer that? And he came up to the podium and said, absolutely, I'm going to be there. This is bigger than any of us. We all need to do this together. And in the first several years, when we opened in '93, they were all participated. And I can't tell you that I never expected it to become what it has become. There's a great movie, in fact, a documentary if you want to rent, I think you can get it on Netflix, called The Tents. And it tells a great story of how Bryant Park got to be, with lots of good people in it. So back to my notes now. That's how it happened. But that's it. say it takes a village, just as Hillary Clinton has said, but it's a very cool village. And I never really could have dreamt that this common sense business initiative could have grown to the degree it has. And I certainly can't take credit for all of it on how fashion has exploded and the changes that have occurred with the first digital film when we were doing Fashion Week. And now the world of social media and the internet and the bloggers and the iPhones and the handhelds who you want to kill at some fashion shows because nobody looks at the shows anymore. They're busy looking in their hand, tweeting and texting. And that has really totally changed our industry and changed everything we do around the world. But I can take much of the credit for it, and I'm extremely proud of the fact that New York's Fashion Week brings into the city approximately $845 million. It's New York's most successful event and generates more revenue for the city than the US Open tennis tournament. And I do take pride in so many of the careers that have been launched on those runways, and the many careers surrounding the runways, the production of the shows that have been created, from models to photographers, caterers to videographers, PR firms to stylists and producers. When I left IMG Fashion, who had bought the Fashion Week from the CFDA after the 10 years in 2000, and I decided I had to leave after Bryant Park was over. I saw that that was my baby. Let somebody else deal with what was happening at Lincoln Center. But I got a letter a letter that I treasure, actually, from a man whose company shoots 95% of all the runway videos. And he wrote to me, and I'm going to read you some of this. Hey, Fern, after seeing you and celebrating closure with everyone Thursday night, and this was at a big closing party in Bryant Park Tents that I insisted that we do to commemorate the tents and the history in Bryant Park. And I personally raised the money for it. Called the New York Times and friends we had who had been sponsors to pay for it. And he wrote, I left with an unexpectedly emotional reaction from what came up for me as a result of focusing my thoughts on all these years in the tents. I want to share some with you here. What goes down from this moment on, nothing can alter or remove the accomplishment that you have spearheaded in the past. And what you have already done, putting this all together, will continue to reverberate positively, impacting so many people's lives. Of course, before the tents, my company had an established client base in the fashion niche, but the consolidation of the shows enabled us to grow exponentially. And then so much more work started growing out of the shows. All of a sudden, our client base grew, and work with them in between show season grew as well. So in some ways, the life I have now, the lives of my children, in terms of how I've been able to provide for them, the lives of my staff and enormous numbers of our freelancers, and the people in their lives, have all been positively impacted in some way by your actions. And Fern, realize that we are just one very small corner of the business of fashion in the center. Imagine this applying to everybody, from sample makers to security guys to fashion students. It's a huge chunk of a piece of the universe. So I say to you in Nashville, carve out your chunk of the universe. You have a great team of people who have created an event here for the past 4 years. They all have real jobs other than putting this week together. But they all believe in the community and the talent and the challenge. They have identified a fashion industry in Nashville, and the Nashville Fashion Forward Initiative and Fund is a terrific program, and testimony to their passion and commitment, which is being galvanized to further your passion. Mike Smith, Connie Richardson, Robert Campbell, Marcia Masula, and countless others have actually successfully asked themselves the questions I posed at the beginning. And I believe they've answered them better than most cities have, and they should be applauded. Nashville is hot now. Take full advantage of that. Connect all the dots in this city. Invite your colleagues to participate and embrace what's going on here. Music, Embrace the music, as it is truly fashion's best friend. Did you ever go to a fashion show without music? It doesn't work. And miraculously, when the music is right at a show, the girls walk better. The feet are tapping in the front row, and the editors even smile. And the clothes actually look better. So I urge you all to have fun, otherwise it's not worth it. And while you're doing it, be nice. It's my favorite expression I tell people everywhere, because if you're not nice, there's no reason to do business with people. You only want to work with people that are nice. There's too many other people doing the same job. So be nice, and you'll be pleasantly surprised with what the universe delivers. And thank you for inviting me to join you.